Hey, this video is about cost averaging strategies using a auction-based system in Raindex. So I already recorded a different video that you can see separately that at a high level presents a few different strategies for doing cost averaging, such as Oracle-based, auction-based, and tranche or grid-based. And this video is a bit more of a deep dive into the auction-based cost averaging strategy. It's not going to go right into the implementation details of the Rainlane code. So it's going to be more detailed than a high-level summary, but still something that most people should be able to understand just with some diagrams and thinking about the way that the strategy operates over time without getting into the nitty-gritty of individual lines of code. I'll do another video as a follow-up that does get into the code for anyone who's interested in it, but that'll be a separate video. And I'll also make a separate video that goes through the specifics of how to deploy the contracts or the strategies as contracts that use this approach that are on the web app, how to configure them, examples, so not needing to know the code, but understanding how to put them together. So in this video, we're just going to look at the overall mechanics at a conceptual level. So the cost averaging strategy as an auction works in a fairly simple manner where you, over time, start with a price that is high, and then nobody is going to take that trade because it's an auction, you don't want them to. And then you slowly bring the price down over time, and then at some point the price that you're offering is going to be considered reasonable for wherever the market is at that point. Okay, so if we repeatedly do these auctions, it's going to result at trades over time, and eventually it's going to build up an average price over time. So that's why it's a cost averaging strategy. We repeatedly do these auctions until we have traded many times over a long period of time, and then we've established some sort of average cost with the strategy. So the way that that looks visually is if we have a strategy which is starting at some high price, and we will want to set some minimum price, and let's say 0 is down here. We're not going all the way to 0 necessarily. We are going to start by asking for a lot, whatever that means, and then actually every unit of time, let's say across here, we halve price, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. After the same amount of time, we halve it again, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we halve it again. So we have this nice exponential decay. So it's not a straight line, it actually halves like this, okay? So it's an exponential decay. If you don't know what that means, it doesn't really matter. The basic idea behind it is that no matter where the real price is in here, we have a good chance of intersecting it. If I did a straight line, for example, so let's say we just put in a straight line up here, then it's actually more difficult for people to configure, because you could easily put in a straight line like this that takes a very long time to cover a decent range of prices, whereas this halving approach, it doesn't really matter where you start the auction. You could start it very high, very, very high, and the first thing that will happen is after the amount of time that's been configured, it'll halve, and then it will halve again. So you can think of the benefit of this halving approach as it cuts out the unused sort of extra range in the auction that is way above the market very quickly, because it's always halving. So it's a bit of a strange curve, but it's quite common in a lot of things, in that it doesn't actually matter where the market is, you're going to reach it relatively quickly. Even if this price was 1,000 times above where the market is at, if you keep halving it, you're going to go 500, 250, 100, well, 125, but you're going to cut down very, very quickly, and you're going to end up exactly where the market is in not that long in the scheme of things. So it's a very forgiving curve from the perspective of needing to predict the future, which is what we want really, because this strategy doesn't know anything about the future, actually. So it's designed with the minimum knowledge required. So you configure it, you set it up, and it makes no opinion about, well, as little opinion as possible about what the future market price is going to be. It just wants to buy any market price. So it's going to run an auction with very little opinion of where the market actually is, right? So let's use black for where the market is. Let's say it's here and the market is messy, so it's doing this sort of thing. And then at some point, it's going to intersect this auction curve. And then here a trade is going to happen, right? And when that happens, the strategy just runs again. So there's some multiplier, say 10% or 1% or 50%, some multiplier that we're going to add to this price. So we can go back to the green and we can say, well, if it was a 10% multiplier, okay, so if this is 0 and that's where we are, an extra 10% is about here, a new point here, and then it's going to do the exact same thing again. It's going to do these halvings. So we're going to get another curve that does this, and then the market is going to do the same thing again, up, down, wherever, and then we're going to get another intersection, and then same thing again. This just happens forever, basically, another 10%. So here to here, 10%, there, another curve. We just have unlimited curves where whatever the market is doing, okay, well, I've already drawn it going up. Let's keep going with that. Maybe it intersects here. Very quickly, the market's going up. We can go again. We can straight away add another 10% to this up here. So see, even if the market is going up very quickly, if it's hitting these curves, there's another one, we add another 10%. The strategy just keeps building more and more curves on top of this market movement. So any direction the market goes in, the curve is either going to lift itself rapidly to track the market going up, or if the market then, say, it dumps quite a lot, this curve is going to eventually keep halving and halving and halving and halving until it does hit this market point again. So this never-ending auction-based approach to trading basically never fails to cause trades to go through, which makes it quite effective as a cost averaging strategy, because eventually the curve will always reach the market, and it'll do that at every scale up to this baseline. So in the strategy, you can configure a minimum amount that you need for this strategy, and the curve will never go below that. So this strategy has an optional minimum where if the market goes below that, so the price is worse than the absolute worst value that you're willing to take, the strategy can disable itself effectively. and it will keep running a curve, but that curve is just going to get closer and closer and closer to that point until it's so close to that point that it basically is at that point, and it will just wait for the market to recover. And then as soon as the market recovers to that point, if it does, it'll do the same thing. It'll set up another 10% above, kick off a new curve, another 10% above, kick off a new curve. And that is basically all there is to the cost averaging auction-based approach. It's designed to be simple and cover the widest range of tokens and networks possible, because it doesn't rely on external oracle prices to exist, which may not exist for a lot of tokens. There's no reliable on-chain price that you can reference when you're doing a cost averaging. Maybe there's a Uniswap pool, but a lot of Uniswap pools can be quite small, which makes them easy to manipulate, which you don't want. A lot of oracles that are price oracles that are run by trusted providers will support only a limited number of prices. They can't support absolutely every imaginable price for every imaginable type of data. So they provide what they can, and a lot of smaller tokens can slip through the gaps there. So if there's no oracle, or you don't want to use an oracle, you can use a auction-based strategy like this that works for any combination of tokens. And the tokens don't even need to be a well-known or highly liquid pair, I should say. So for example, you normally may think of, so you have some ETH and you want to sell some ETH, you would normally look at the pricing in terms of dollars, and you would buy and sell ETH for dollars. But with a auction-based approach like this, you could make Bitcoin the other token, okay? And you can create a auction that does this halving around the ETH to Bitcoin ratio, which at the moment is around 0.04. So you can go directly from ETH into Bitcoin through halvings. You don't need to have a specific pool, although there are pools for Bitcoin and Ethereum. Maybe Ethereum and Doge, maybe Bitcoin and SHIB or something. I don't know. You can take any token combination really and run it against a series of auctions, and it will still work. So the main strength of this strategy is that it applies to basically any token. I won't say any token because there are some strange tokens out there, but for a very vast majority of token pairs and networks out there, you can cost average from any token to any other token with an auction-based approach. And all you need to do as the strategy owner who deploys it is figure out a starting point. Only this starting point here. All the subsequent starting points are automatically calculated when the owner sets a multiplier. So you can choose how much the strategy jumps up each time there's a trade, 10% or 1% or whatever. But you do just need to set an initial point that the trade starts at, so that the first trade isn't somewhere down here. Like, you really just have to set any point within this region here. So this is a valid starting point, this is a valid starting point, this is a valid starting point. Anything that's up here is totally valid to start the strategy at. The only thing you're trying to avoid is something down here. This is not good. If you set the trading below where the market is at the moment that the strategy gets deployed, basically you lose the money that represents the distance between where you started and where the market is currently at, because the strategy will trade at this price, it won't trade at this price. So it will fairly quickly readjust itself, because if you did deploy down here, then it would immediately trade, and then it would add 10%, which would be about here. And then it would do a little auction and then hit this quite quickly and then bump up another 10% and then hit this quite quickly and then bump up another 10%. So it will rapidly self-heal to some degree if you set the parameter to low when you start out. So it's not the end of the world generally, because it will very quickly ride up these percentages until it actually gets a bit of headroom up here, and then you can start a curve that's actually going to have some space like this. But it's not ideal, and there's not really any reason to put yourself in that situation. You're much better off setting a initial value that's much larger than what you need for the market, something way up here, and letting the power of the halvings bring that curve down to the market. It might just take a little bit longer before the strategy starts trading than put yourself below the market for some reason, and basically like you're missing out on money at that point. You're selling your tokens for less than you could get. So that's just, you're only hurting yourself if you do that. But it's relatively simple. You just make the price much higher than the market. That's all you have to do. And then you set how long this halving is. You could say halve every hour, every 2 hours, every day. It's up to you what you feel comfortable with. So in a cost averaging context, if you set the slower halving rate, you will still find the market, but because it's going to take longer for the curve to find the market, when the trades do go through, they will be bigger trades because the strategy is going to have a bigger budget to put trades through at that point, because it will have been building up a budget to trade while no trades have been going through, and then eventually a trade will be possible, and then a trade will go through and it will be larger, right? Because there's fewer trades. So that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. Experiment with different values, see what you prefer. Honestly, it's designed to be relatively easy to set up. What else can we say about this strategy? There's not really a lot to it. You set the rate that you want to buy things at, and you set the rate that you want this curve to halve at, and you set where it starts, and you set how much it jumps up each time a trade goes through. That's really it. The only thing that I would caution, other than this initial, this position being too low initially, is that if you make the halving very fast, so say this this curve, we'll actually use a different color just to illustrate the point. It's red for a fast one. Let's say you configured a curve that starts up here, great, but then you make it halve, say every one of these squares, however long that is in our imaginary strategy. Let's say you halve every square. So you're going to, after one square, you're going to be way down here. If this is our baseline, actually it'll be here. And then after another square, you're going to be way down here. This is too fast, because this is going to come straight down, and while mathematically this is fine, in reality what's going to happen is that the prices of the auction is going to be moving so fast that the trade is going to be slower than the auction itself, I guess, is the best way that I can explain it. Imagine you're on Ethereum and it takes 12 seconds for a block to go through, or you're on some other network and it still takes a few seconds, and you also need some time for people to calculate your auction and understand how quickly it's moving. There's always a bit of a delay between when the price changes according to your auction and when somebody can actually put a trade through. It takes physical time for them to actually put in the trade on the blockchain. So let's say that's 10 seconds or 30 seconds or a minute or a few minutes, depending on various things. Let's say it's a few minutes. If you change the price by 5% in a minute, and it takes a minute for the trade to go through, then you're not actually going to have the trade go through here. It's going to go through somewhere down here in reality. So even though this is a perfect mathematical curve and every single second it's perfectly re-updating itself and it's exactly right, you have to remember that somebody else is on the other side of your auction and they need time to react. So setting up you don't need a curve that is very, very slow. There's no need to make a curve that's going to take days to halve. That is just going to be annoyingly slow for other reasons. But if you're halving on the order of minutes, you will probably overshoot the market and you'll probably give yourself a worse deal. So I would say keep the auctions so that the halving is half an hour, a few hours, something like that, so that there's enough time for the traders to actually react to the auction and take the trade in the market conditions, with a few minutes for that reaction time without you just moving the price too fast and that resulting in you getting a worse price than what the market actually would have given you. So that's pretty much the only other way that you can really shoot yourself in the foot setting up this strategy. So it's just two things. You set this way too low, or you make this too fast and you start overshooting the market. The overshooting thing is probably more dangerous on the whole because, as I said, the initial setup is self-healing to some degree. It'll just bounce its way up until it finds the real market price and start building the curve again. But this steep jumping situation is for every trade. It's not a once-off if it's configured. So if this trade went through down here after this jump and then it goes up another 10%, it's immediately going to cut through extremely quickly again and then be down here and then do the same thing again. It's going to jump up and then cut down and then be a low. So the overshooting problem is kind of the worst thing that you could do with this strategy. So thankfully it's very easy to avoid. Just don't make the strategy halve too quickly. Give it at least 20 to 30 minutes for a halving so that there's some buffer. But I would do more. Usually I would do, personally, I'd be looking at like 2 hours for a halving. But also I am doing averaging strategies over weeks or months. So waiting 2 hours or even waiting 6 hours for a halving is just not a problem for me because I'm expecting the overall strategy to take much more than a day or even several days. So letting the auctions happening relatively slowly is totally fine. Yeah, it's really up to you. Just watch out for those two things. That's basically how the cost averaging auction strategy works at the high level. Yeah, I'll put more in-depth analysis of the actual code of mathematics in a separate video. That's enough for this.